we need to get started. It's gonna be a long one. Hi, I'm Lars, and this is my land. In my land, I get to do pretty much whatever I want. And today, I'm gonna talk about Rubber Soul, and you're gonna listen, because it's my land. One of the many remarkable things about the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership is the speed at which they churned out music. They have written literally hundreds of songs together, as in hundreds of songs that we have not even heard. And the more time they spent together, the more music they made. And they were together almost constantly. But after pumping out 5 albums in 2.5 years, the seemingly infinite well had run dry. The music that inspired them changed, and how they wrote songs and how they expected them to sound changed with it. With their backs up against a wall and the clock ticking, for the first time ever, the Beatles go into the studio with almost nothing. After a pretty rocky start, the album, created in a pressure cooker, went on to revolutionize popular music forever. And that album was Rubber Soul. Welcome to Annoying Memos Land. Beep, 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 beep. If you're new here, I talk mostly about the Beatles, but I'm also interested in TV and movies, but I haven't gotten to that yet because I've been working on a video essay on the TV show Lost for so long now that if I don't mention it in every video I do, I will be stuck in a laundromat with this guy.
He'd been hiding in the walls.
I'm not afraid of bees, but I'm afraid of him. I didn't say shit 5 times, please. By the way, I'm redoing all of my Beatle album reviews, so they're more like this one. The standards, they're going up, baby. I'll also do some shorter album videos like the Beach Boys Pet Sounds video. No research, just reactions. But the Beatles ones, we're coming with everything now. I would absolutely love it if you would like and subscribe and all of that jazz. It actually helps a lot and it's completely free and you get to see me. What a bargain. Okay, find me on social media at This Is Larsland. If you can't find me, then I'm not there. Oh, and sometimes the footage on the screen has nothing to do with the thing that I'm talking about, but usually it does. I'm just trying to keep it interesting for you. Now let's go back to my land. Part 1, writing and recording. When John and Paul got together to start writing Rubber Soul, they struggled. According to Paul, it was the one time that they almost had a dry session. But the result was a song. And it's controversial to say the least, but we'll get there when we listen to it. Normally I talk about Run For Your Life right here, right now, because chronologically that's where it goes. But I have some thoughts, feelings, opinions. I'm just gonna tuck them in the end because, like, you know, I say more than I planned. I say way more than I planned. So stories that go with each of the songs will actually be coming when we listen to the songs because it makes sense. Anyway, so it's October 1965 and we are beginning Rubber Soul. Oh, come on, stop typing. You stop it. I know exactly what you're about to say. Technically, the Rubber Soul recording started on June 17th or June 19th. I wrote June 17th. I just want to check because, oh my God, if I call out nitpickers and then get the date wrong, I would literally get crucified. Yeah, June 17th. Because Wait was recorded for Help, the previous album, but Wait was scrapped for Help and picked for Rubber Soul, which actually kind of shows you how desperate they were for material. All right, back on track. October 12th, 1965, they begin recording and here is the speed run, so to speak. The deadline is tight. They spend only 13 days in the recording studio. The boys have to have the album done in time for the holidays, and it did not go that smoothly at times. The October 27 session was scrapped due to lack of material. And like I said, they had to pull weight. But this is one of the first times that the Beatles were able to dedicate themselves fully to the music. No radio, no television, no live performances. They were finally able to hunker down in the studio and get to work. Now, they did get their MBEs during this point, but that's a different video. And there was Granada's TV special, The Music of Lennon-McCartney, but that's also a different video. And those were the only 2 other items on their calendar. And even though the writing started out really tough, the first day of recording included one of John Lennon's most loved and discussed songs, Norwegian Wood. strong start. Now, this isn't going to be a day by day, but there are a few noteworthy things here. The second day of recording, the Beatles tackled Drive My Car. Super fun song, and it was the first time the Beatles recorded past midnight. And this was the first of many. In fact, most of the nights they recorded to 3 a.m. It started a pattern of working all night. And they recorded Day Tripper and We Can Work It Out on October 16th and 18th respectively, but we're not talking about it because it's a different video. And seriously, that made me so physically uncomfortable to even type. That could even technically be 2 videos. It could be one about the singles and one about the music videos. And oh my God, please stop. During these sessions, the Beatles wound up caring more about how they can fine tune their instruments and make them sound and then manipulate them through production rather than what they could just achieve from playing live. I'm going to include quotes from Anthology as we go because it's just supplemental information. And like I said, the standards are high now, so I'm here to deliver. It is not the heaviest book I own, but it is the largest, and I hate that they did it like this. I really do. It is so hard to pull information from. George said, but Rubber Soul was my favorite album, even at that time. I think it was the best one we made. We certainly knew we were making a good album. We did spend a bit more time on it and tried new things, but the most important thing about it was that we were suddenly hearing sounds we weren't able to hear before. Also, we were being more influenced by other people's music, and everything was blossoming at that time, including us, because we were still growing. The attitude toward touring was already souring for at least half the Beatles at this point. Their musical curiosities and the appeal of being able to achieve more in the studio continued to alienate them more from the road. They spent as much time as they could, like I said, pushing boundaries with this album. This was the first time the Beatles took initiative and had demands in the studio. John says, we were getting better technically and musically. We finally took over the studio. In the early days, we had to take what we were given and we had to make it in 2 hours. And 1 or 3 takes was enough. We didn't know how you could get more bass. We were learning new techniques. Then we got contemporary. And I think Rubber Soul was about when that started happening. Anything any of us do is influenced, but it began to take its own form. Rubber Soul was a matter of having all experienced the recording studio, having grown musically as well, but getting the knowledge of the place, the studio. We were more precise about making the album, that's all, and we took over the cover and everything. There were an array of exotic instruments used, including the sitar and the harmonium. The 3-part harmonies with John, Paul, and George set Rubber Soul apart from the other music coming out at the time, but also formed a Beatles brand of music that shifts a lot of the way the vocals sound going forward. This album was very inspirational to the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album, and boy, oh boy, did I get that wrong in my Pet Sounds video. I know, I said that it was inspired by Revolver, and then all of my reactions were talking about what I thought. I hate that video so much, but YouTube likes it. Please stop promoting my video with my biggest mistake. I can't wait to private that video. I can't wait. In a lot of ways, Rubber Soul is the bridge from the early Beatles to the experimental Beatles. Next, we're going to Revolver and then Sgt. Pepper after that. Nothing is the same anymore. And with George Martin's willingness to toy with recording and producing, nothing is off limits anymore. He was very good. In the early days, he'd had an assistant who'd go through the rehearsals with us, and George would just come in for the take to tape the press button, or press the tape button. That changed, and he was there all the time. And then as we went on, we would just be playing and playing great. And George Martin knew how to keep the tape rolling. He lost that old attitude that you only press the button when you are going to do the take. We began to have the tape rolling all the time, and we got a lot of good takes that way. Paul says, George Martin was very understanding, even though we were going to change the style and get more psychedelic or surreal. It never seemed to throw him, even though sometimes it was not quite his taste. And the inclusion of Jeff Emmerich, that is a different video. I cannot remember for the life of me what documentary it was. It was one of the literally 43 Beatles documentaries on Tubi, but there was a guy talking about his reaction to Girl, the song. It might have been nobody, but it might have been Brian Wilson of Beach Boys fame. And he was at first like, oh my God, what are you doing? What were they thinking? And then he went on to say that it was completely heartbreaking to him. But he was like, wow, this is weird. He thought Girl in Rubber Soul was weird. It doesn't sound weird at all. That's not the word that I would put on it. But that's because I've lived under its influence. Speaking of being under the influence, let's talk about Bob Dylan. Part 2, Bob Dylan. The entire background section of the Rubber Soul Wikipedia is talking about Bob Dylan. I swear. I mean, not really, but kind of. Luckily, I pulled from several sources, so we have more to talk about than that. But since Wikipedia thought this was very important, we're going to talk about him for a second. Everyone knows that Bob Dylan introduced the Beatles to the sweet, sweet Canyon Briss. Baby, you know I can't say that word on YouTube this early in the video. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean. But the longer the video goes, the safer we get from angry YouTube. So Dylan did in fact corrupt our baby boys. Ringo went first because the rest of them are with the devil's lettuce. That's a different video though. But Dylan's music heavily influenced the Beatles. Some people say that John changed the way he sang entirely after he started listening to Bob Dylan. I've seen like an angry comment about it somewhere. And there's a big shift from Help to Rubber Soul. His attitude and approach to music injected the folk aspects that we see in Rubber Soul. At least that's what Wikipedia says. George Martin says, by the time of Rubber Soul, they were ready for new musical directions. In the early days, they were very influenced by American rhythm and blues. But I think the so-called Beatles sound had something to do with the Liverpool being a port. Maybe they heard the records before we did. They certainly knew more about Motown and black music than anybody else did, and that was a tremendous influence on them. And then, as time went on, other influences became apparent. Classical influences in modern music, and that was from 1965 and beyond. There's a cat at the door. Paul says things were changing. The direction was moving away from the poppy stuff, like Thank You Girl, From Me to You, and She Loves You. The early material was directly relating to our fans, saying, please buy this record. And now we'd come to a point where we thought, we've done that. Now we can branch out into songs that are a little more surreal, a little more entertaining. And other people were starting to arrive on the scene who were influential. Dylan was influencing us quite heavily. Admittedly, I do not know much about Bob Dylan. No shade to Bob Dylan. I just have no interest at this point to get more involved in other acts from the 60s. I've done Beach Boys stuff. I will do Beach Boys stuff for just the obvious reasons that Beach Boys fans are feral, with peace and love, of course. So when we're talking about Bob Dylan, I do rely on what I see on the internet. I don't even know that much about the time that he spent with the Beatles, you know, because I'm just kind of like, eh. That's just the honest truth. Don't unsubscribe. I said it's free and you get access to me. Editing Lars hates you so much. Now that we have all the boring recording stuff put aside, I'm kidding. Let's get on to the important stuff. Part 3, the substances. As Ringo so lovingly put it in a ton of interviews, as if we don't know what is going on. Very tongue-in-cheek, very Ringo. I noticed that there were some conflicting reports on the influence of substances on the Rubber Soul album in the Anthology book. Ringo says, there was a lot of experimentation on Rubber Soul, influenced, I think, by the substances. George Martin knew about it and used to get annoyed. Well, not really annoyed. He would just go, oh God, because things would take a little longer. When we did take too many substances, the music was shit, absolute shit. At the time, we'd think it was great, but when we came to record the next day, we'd all look at each other and say, we'll have to do that again. It didn't work for the Beatles to be too deranged when making music. There's very little material when we were out to lunch. It was good to take it the day before. Then you'd have that creative memory, but you couldn't function while you were under the influence. So George says, it used to make us feel ill as well. John would pick us up in his big Rolls Royce with blacked out windows when we were living out in the stockbroker belt. Ringo, John, and I had all moved out of town to Surrey. He'd picked up Ringo and me, and then we'd head into town because a Rolls Royce didn't have the proper springs. It just rolls around. The black windows would be shut, so we'd be getting about double doses of reefers. By the time we'd get to Hammersmith, we were loaded and feeling ill, and we would pull up at Abbey Road Studios and we would fall out of the car. Reefers are hard to avoid in the Beatles story. All the time, Mal and Neil would sit in studio number 2 behind the sound baffles while we were rolling them up and smoking. You can hear on one of the tapes from the sessions, a song starts and John goes, hang on, and Paul starts filling in for him, and then John comes back, okay. And by the time the engineers have rewound the tape, you're thinking, I'll just go have another hit. John says, Rubber Soul was the pot album and Revolver was the acid. It was like pills influenced us in Hamburg, drink influenced us, and so. I mean, we weren't all stoned making Rubber Soul because in those days we couldn't work on pot. We never recorded under acid. It's like saying, did Dylan Thomas write Under Milkwood on beer? What does that have to do with it? The beer is to prevent the rest of the world from crowding in on you. The drugs are to prevent the rest of the world from crowding in on you. They don't make you write any better. I never wrote any better stuff because I was on acid or not on it. Part 4, the album title and the cover art. There's been a few different stories on how the album became named Rubber Soul. But in reality, the answer is on a recording from June 14th, 1965. Paul kept saying, "Plastic Soul, man, Plastic Soul." This is from Lewison. For the benefit of the other Beatles, he went on to explain that the phrase was coined by black musicians to describe Mick Jagger. He sounded so cool, you know, black, but he had no soul. The cover photo was taken by Robert Freeman in John's garden. The actual layout of the photo was an accident. So Freeman was actually projecting the image onto an LP-sized piece of cardboard. It was skewed and the boys liked it. They were like, "Hey, that's cool. Can you do that?" And he said, "Sure, I can do it." So they dug it and decided to go with it. George said that it allowed the group to lose their little innocence tag, the naivete, and it was in keeping with their emergence as fully fledged potheads. The lettering was done by Charles Front, and it's important too. His inspiration came from the album's title, and he said, "If you tap into a rubber tree, then you get a sort of globule." So I started thinking of creating a shape that represented that, starting narrow and filling it out. But this style also founded that fun, psychedelic 1960s lettering that we see everywhere and associate with the flower power movement. But if you ask the Paul is dead conspiracy theorist, it's an upside down broken heart and an ace because Ringo likes to play cards. The Paul is dead conspiracy theory is completely messy, makes no sense, and is absolutely awesome, and you should go watch my video on it because it's a really good video and it actually got suppressed by YouTube. That's a real story. It's weirder than you think. Part 5, the critical reception and impact. So this album is credited with the Great Sitar Explosion by Ravi Shankar. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Ravi Shankar.
Okay, so there you go. I'd rather get it right than be disrespectful. But the Great Sitar Explosion is, you guessed it, a different video. You know I have to do that, right? You know I have to do that. This album is considered a combination of folk, rock, soul, baroque, proto-psychedelia, and the sitar. But wait, somebody said that it was a combination of gospel, country, baroque, counterpoint, and even French popular ballads. Either way, almost everyone was happy. Let's just go through some of the reviews. I've got a little bit of the good, mid, and the bad, all from Wikipedia because reviews are shockingly hard to find. The critical response was absolutely great. People who had criticized them heavily before now open rave reviews saying the Beatles sound more and more like music. Their blend is excellent, their performance smooth, and their charm, wit, and excitement run high. The boys were praised for finding new ways to make us enjoy listening to them. The album was considered sensational and trendsetting in the pop industry. Newsweek called the Beatles the bards of pop, which is a fucking weird thing to call the Beatles. Bards? Bards. The bards of pop? Okay, Cujo, relax. Put a lid on it. Now, the Record Mirror said maybe the album didn't have enough variety, but said one marvels and wonders at the constant stream of melodic ingenuity stemming from the boys, both as performers and composers. Keeping up their pace of creativeness is quite fantastic. But let's bring them down a peg with Richard Green's review, which is also in Record Mirror, and he wrote that if it was recorded by anyone else but the Beatles, it would not be worthy of release. I don't think he listened to the same album. He said that the tracks were rid of the old Beatles' excitement and compulsiveness, and he acknowledged that it was an unpopular opinion before saying that judging LPs strictly on their merits, recent albums from Manfred Mann, the Beach Boys, and Jerry Lee Lewis rank high above Rubber Soul. But also want to mention that in a 1966 review of Revolver, KRLA Beat said that the title of Rubber Soul was now a phrase used to describe a creation of exceptional excellence in the field of music. It was the exception, not the rule. You wanted to pull a Rubber Soul in your field. Part 6, Facty Facts. The album was recorded from October 12th to November 11th, 1965, except June 17th for Wait. They spent 13 days in studio, which totaled 113 hours. Mixing took another 17 hours, which was spread across 6 days. It was recorded in EMI Studios, London, produced by George Martin, of course, and engineered by Norman Smith. This was Norman Smith's last album with the Beatles, and it was the last time the Beatles released 2 whole albums of newly recorded material in a year. Okay, and by the way, Almost everybody says that this was a great time, that they had an absolute blast in studio, except for Norman Smith. He says that he started to see cracks with the boys, specifically John and Paul, around this time, considering disagreements in their music. And I think he's probably exaggerating the significance of any sort of tension during this point. John says, "We have plenty of arguments, but we're also attuned to each other. And we know each other so well through the years that an argument never reaches a climax. It's like mind reading. If an argument's building up between Ringo and I, say it comes to a point where we know what's going to come next and everyone packs it in. All the people who have conflict in show business either get married about 19 times or they leave the group and go solo." Once the album was released, it had replaced the Sound of Music soundtrack at the top. It's been 8 weeks at #1 and remained in the top 10 until mid-July 1966. That is 7 months. It sold 1.2 million copies within 9 days of release. There was no single because they released We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper on the same day. That's a different video, like I mentioned. These sales were off the charts. Cannot overstate it. This was unprecedented, truly. This album was the first time that album sales matched single sales, and that's important because before this, singles were where you got the big bucks, babe, because that's the teenage market. Buying albums was really more for adults, and the Beatles were kind of weird when they put out Please Please Me, because a lot of teeny bopper type bands didn't put out albums because their audience wasn't buying them, but people bought them for the Beatles. But now the people are buying this album just like they're buying the singles. The money isn't a barrier for the enjoyment. The public wants to hear all of the Beatles. And you know what? So do we. Let's listen. Part 7, let's listen to the album. It's time to listen, let's go. As always, we're going with the UK release, but the 2009 remaster. I am only able to play 3 to 7 seconds straight of the Beatles music. I've explained it more in the description, and I sometimes use interrupters so I can play more just because we want to listen, right? I wish that I could jam out with you. I'm so sorry. Sorry if the edits become a little less fancy as we go. I'm trying to get it to you sooner because I'm running behind. And by the way, I'm calling this shit right now. I'm not crying on this one today. This album won't make me cry, probably. Hopefully. No, I'll look like an asshole if I do. And it is a few hours later, and I do have a red tongue from cough drops, and I will not apologize for it. So it's Drive My Car time. I'm just gonna read what he says in the lyrics and then we'll listen to the song. "The nearest John and I ever got to a dry session was with a song called Golden Rings. I'd brought a version of it out to John's house and we stalled when we got to the lines, 'You can buy me golden rings, give me all that kind of thing.' We kept singing that over and over and couldn't get beyond it because it was so shockingly bad. Part of the problem was that we'd already had a diamond ring in Can't Buy Me Love. Golden Rings was unoriginal and uninspiring. We couldn't get past it, so we left it, went and had a cup of tea, and when we came back, we started thinking of the woman as an LA girl. That improved things a bit. Then she wanted a chauffeur. This is a little like the song Norwegian Wood, in the sense that you've had a cast of characters, and then before you know, you've got a story. And you're going to burn someone's house down because she's got a lot of Norwegian wood, so let's burn it. And meanwhile, let's sleep in the bath. Once you get into creating a narrative and storytelling, it's so much more entertaining. It draws you forward so much more easily. Now we were dramatizing the interviewing of a chauffeur. We got over that dry moment and finished the song. It became the one that didn't get away, and its success had to do with getting rid of golden rings and heading to Baby You Can Drive My Car. I know there's a theory that rock and roll couldn't have existed without the guitars of Leo Fender, but it probably couldn't have existed without Henry Ford either. I'm thinking of the relationship between the motor car and what happens in the back seat. We know that people shagged before the motor car, but the motor car gave the erotic a whole new lease on life. Think of Chuck Berry's Riding Along in My Automobile. Chuck is one of America's great poets. Beep, 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 yeah. There you go. It was always good to get nonsense lyrics in. And this song lent itself to beep, 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 yeah. We did it in close harmony so it would sound a bit like a horn. Then they're staying with just 2 chords for the whole verse. Sometimes you don't even need 2. 1 would do. One of my favorite examples of using just 1 chord is She's Leaving Home, where I thought the chord changed. So it goes she, E major, I think it is. Stays on E, is leaving. Change? No. Home? Change? No. It stays on that E major for a long time. I felt proud of that because the natural instinct is to change with the opening of every new line. The same is true of verses of Drive My Car. 2 chords are more than enough. Maybe even 1 is more than enough. Very interesting. I think we can go ahead and start by saying that the percussion on this song is very indicative of how it goes for Rubber Soul. There's a lot of very intricate percussion throughout this whole album, and we've got cowbell, which I always love. I will always ask for more cowbell. And it always just gives me, I don't know, it's a very fun feeling. It's a very fun percussive instrument. I don't know what the hell I'm saying. Ooh, the piano in the back. Piano in the back, baby. That's some good stuff. This is another one of those really good examples of the Lennon-McCartney harmony. Specifically, the two of them make a very interesting sound. And Paul, in my land's like terminology and sorts, has several different voices, and this is one of them that's very different. This is like his rock and roll voice to me. No matter what version of Paul singing, there's always that weirdly, oddly complimentary sound of John Lennon's vocals. It works really well with this song. I also really like the piano underneath in the chorus. It's great. It's so high tempo. Here's what happened is that I lost my voice because you're talking at a camera for like an hour and a half, which does not seem like it's that long, but sorry, it gets to be that long and you're like, man, I should just push through this, it blah, blah, blah. But then my voice is going and I'm like, this isn't good. I waited for a while and I came back and it was worse. And then the more I kept talking, the more it was just gone. Anyway, now I want to talk about number 2, Norwegian Wood. Norwegian Wood. Gotta say, Norwegian Wood. Now, I know I get all these comments where it's like, shut up, we just want to listen to the music. I'm so sorry, but if I say deep dive in the title of a Rubber Soul review and I don't talk about Norwegian Wood's backstory, I'm going to get eviscerated, and rightly so. You guys are real Beatles fans. You want the good stuff. So I know that I talk a lot, but I'm giving you guys the good stuff because that's what you want. You want it all in one place. You probably already know most of this. That's been true for like my entire career. Okay, but it's all in one place. That's what I try. Yes, I talk a lot. It's my land, bitch. You can leave right now. That's the point. Norwegian Wood was the first pop song to use the sitar, and that is really interesting. He was actually introduced to the sitar by David Crosby from the Byrds, who had just recently learned the basics of the sitar, and George got really interested in it. He went and got a crummy one. A few months later, he started studying it under Ravi, okay? But that's a different video. You know the drill. In John Lennon's 1971 Rolling Stone interview, which is also a different video, that thing is a mess. This is what he said about using the sitar on the song. I think it was at the studio. Oh, and I also need to mention this. All of these guys tell these stories multiple times. Credit is due in different places, at different stories, as things go on, as grudges fade or reoccur. I think we should take all of it into consideration and assume that most of it can be true at different times, as the truth is multifaceted. Nuance. Am I right? I think it was at the studio. George had just got the sitar and I said, could you play this piece? We went through many different sort of versions of the song and it was never right, and I was getting very angry about it. It wasn't coming out like I said. They said, well, just do it how you want to do it. And I said, well, I just want to do it like this. And they let me go and I did the guitar very loudly into the mic. They spelled Mike, M-I-K-E here, and it makes me mad. Is that how it's spelled in the UK? European, British, English? European, British, English. Nobody should listen to me for anything except for Lost. I know my shit there. Oh my God, how did I cut myself? That wasn't planned, that was good. No, but that's true. And my master document is 188 pages. It's actually 212 now. I did the guitar very loudly into the mic and sang it at the same time. And then George had the sitar and I asked him, could he play the piece that I'd written, you know, D diddly D diddly D, that bit. And he was not sure whether he could play it yet because he hadn't done much on the sitar, but he was willing to give it a go, as his wont. And he learned a bit and dubbed it on after. I think we did it in sections. songs. We know the lyrics of Norwegian Wood. It's just that he knows a girl. She wouldn't let him into his bed. He slept in the bathtub, and then in the morning he set fire to her house. Norwegian Wood is the name of like cheap furniture from what I understand. Some people say that John thought of it for some reason, and some people say that it was Paul's idea because the Asher household, he lived with his girlfriend's family, Jane Asher. He lived in their attic, had a lot of Norwegian wood. That's another theory. Anyway, this is John's actual quote about the affair, and I will tell you right up ahead, there are plenty of people that this could be about, but the one that I've seen it speculated about is Maureen Cleave. That is the journalist who wrote the Beatles are bigger than Jesus article. She was a good friend of John's and a good friend of the Beatles in general. It wasn't her fault that that went like that. It was the US media. I was trying to write about an affair without letting my wife know I was having one. I was sort of writing from my experiences, girls' flats, things like that. I was very careful and paranoid because I didn't want my wife, Sin, to know there was really something going on outside the household. I'd always had some kind of affairs going on, so I was trying to be sophisticated in writing about an affair, but in such a smokescreen way that you couldn't tell. But I can't remember any specific woman it had to do with. So let's go ahead and listen to it. I should say Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown. 2 titles. The guitar work in this song is really intricate and very interesting. I like it a lot. I have a hard time commenting on it specifically because I think it's very intricate and beautiful. However, the harmonies here with John and Paul is delicious. This is like unique. This sounds different than it has before to me, and I think it's of course very complimentary. The sitar underneath, those sweeps underneath, it's very complimentary, doesn't take over the song. Once again, as I said earlier, I wish that I could have heard this when it wasn't a popular instrument. Wasn't a popular instrument that was used in all kinds of music. It's used all times now. It would be a lot more groundbreaking, but it is so interesting anyway. It fits very well. Very cool fade out. Never usually think about that. It's a very cool song. It's definitely one of those songs that people really love. I wouldn't rank it as high as most people do. Not that there's anything wrong technically with the song. I understand. I don't think it's like overrated or anything. I just think that my taste is different. Just reality here. You Won't See Me. And this is a Paul song that I freaking love. When I go you up. This song is a super hard groove. I really like it. The percussion, I think I mentioned this in Drive My Car too, but if I haven't mentioned it, I will probably mention it 80 times. The percussion in this album is unmatched. It is so good. All of the intricacies of what Ringo's doing here, great, unmatched. Whether it was his call, which many of these things are Ringo's call, many of these drum fills and little da-da-das are Ringo's. That's him. And some of them aren't, but let's give some credit where credit's due. Not that it is a specific bone that I'd like to pick. Throughout the entire album, it is awesome. I really think everyone should go back and listen to it with that in mind specifically. It will give you a different view on the album. Great. I love a La La La. The La 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 was inspired by the Beach Boys, according to Paul. Oh, there was an incorrect lining note on this song, and it said that Mal played the Hammond organ. He did not. There's also an incorrect lining on I'm Looking Through You, which says that Ringo played the Hammond organ. There is no audible Hammond organ on this song, and I'm glad that I looked here because that's how it says on Wikipedia. And Lewison saved my ass because I would have said that and gotten it wrong and continue to perpetuate that. So I like this lyrically because this is this attitude of like, I'm over this bullshit, or I don't like the way you're treating me. This is not cool with me. It's more of a John thing, that like edgy, like, ugh, you know, we see it in this album. This is Paul saying, I'm not putting up with this. And this was about Jane. She refused to stop working and make more time for Paul, which is something that the other Beatle wives did. They stopped working to be with their men, which is something that the other wives did, different video. And she was busy a lot of the time. So he's like, we've worked so hard to find all this time to get together and you're busy. I kind of like to see the petty side of Paul. We don't see him very often because he's usually just saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. But this is more of a, you know, little bit of a petty Paul moment. Love it when we can hear George in the harmony. You know this about me. Told you. The harmony in this song is great. Ooh. There are so many intricacies in all of these songs that it's like hard to comment on all of them. This is another good example of a different Paul voice. Very different from Drive My Car. Love the pitch change. Love the beat change. Love it. I love the switch up. I'm always happy with the switch up. Paul's ad-lib vocals right here always stuck with me. So, number 4, Nowhere Man, another very popular John Lennon song. Paul says that he found out later that Nowhere Man was about him. I've seen that nowhere else. Except for in Anthology. Here's a quote from John. I'd spent 5 hours that morning trying to write a song that was good. And I was just sitting trying to think, and I thought of myself sitting there doing nothing and going nowhere. And once I thought of that, it was easy. It all came out. No, I remember now. I'd actually stopped trying to think of something. Nothing would come. I was cheesed off and went for a lie down, having given up. And then I thought of myself as Nowhere Man, sitting in his nowhere land. Nowhere Man came, words and music, the whole damn thing. The same with In My Life. I'd struggled for days and hours to trying to write witty, clever lyrics, then I gave up and In My Life came to me. Letting go is the whole game. Paul says something else. Nowhere Man was one of John's, coming from a big night the night before and getting to bed about 5 in the morning. That was a great one. He said, I started one last night. It turned out later it was about me. He's a real nowhere man. I maybe helped him with a word here or there. He'd already got most of it. I've heard nowhere else that it was about Paul or why it would be. Sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes we misremember. You guys have to know how much I love these people. Nobody ever had any notes written down. We just used to sing a tune and it would come out good. Part of the secret collaboration was that we liked each other. We liked singing at each other. He'd sing something and I'd say yeah and trade off on that. And he'd say Nowhere Land and I'd say For Nobody. It was a two-way thing. He's a real nowhere man. What a deceptive opening, because the harmony is like slow. Sitting in his nowhere land. And then as soon as the guitar comes in, it's like, oh, it's an upbeat song. It's a fun song. I'm gonna go with the cough drop. Sorry for any annoying audio that leads. My you know, you people, I'm sorry. Misophonia. Love a song where we can hear George in the harmony, like I said, and we can hear him throughout this entire one. So just an extra addition, little salt and pepper on top of everything else. Another La La, absolutely no complaints from me ever. You can really hear George in that one. No, I love a good La La La. I love a good punctuatory harmony. Think for yourself. This is a George song. George talked in Anthology where he felt like he was behind with Paul and John because of their songwriting expertise. George says, songwriting for me at the time of Rubber Soul was a bit frightening because John and Paul had been writing since they were 3 years old. It was hard to come in and suddenly write songs. They had had a lot of practice. They'd written most of their bad songs before we'd even gotten into the recording studio. I had to come from nowhere and start writing and have something with at least enough quality to put on the record alongside all of the wondrous hits. It was very hard. Of course, this is one of his kind of burgeoning new songs. He, I think, did very well. I like this song quite a bit. Maracas, always fun. Always make it a little bit like that. So. Good percussion there. I think his voice sounds great. I think it's a fun song. I think it's not his best. I hope that's okay. I'm sorry. This just could be the American in me. I know how these boys talk, and yet every time I hear her or their, every time, always gets me. I'm always like, damn, that's really, really Liverpudlian of George. It's like really pronounced with them. Harmonies here are great, and this line right here. That line, I really like that because you've got time to fix it. You know, Reddit, r/ami the you can be the asshole in that moment. God knows that I am regularly the asshole, but you've got time to be a better person. And there are things you should fix. And I like that. George does come off very judgy here, and he is. George is a judgmental little guy. He's honest. He's always been very honest. The percussion, guys, is very good. The guitar sounds really good here. I don't know if I've not like noticed that before. Every time gets me. The Word. John says, it sort of dawned on me that love was the answer when I was younger on the Rubber Soul album. My first expression of it is in a song called The Word. The word is love. In the good book and the bad books that I've read, whatever, wherever, the word is love. It seems like the underlying theme to the universe. Everything that was worthwhile down to this love, love, love thing. As it is the struggle to love, to be loved and express that just something about love. That's fantastic. I think that whatever else love is, and it's many, many things, it is constant, and it's been the same forever, and I don't think it will ever change. Even though I'm not always a loving person, I want to be that. I want to be as loving as possible. Paul said, the word could be a Salvation Army song. The word is love, but it could be Jesus. It isn't, mind you, but it could be. Very strong start. Very groovy song. It starts out so groovy, and I just want to bop to it. John Lennon hated his voice, and he should never have hated his voice. Are you guys hearing this? And we're hearing this. Oh, that first line, very strong. Sounds very good. I have no complaints. No one should ever complain about John's voice. I've got feelings. Gonna have to use interrupters just so we can jam to it. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so groovy. It's so groovy though. It's so fun. This is a hard one to pause, like actually. Tell me that this isn't like one of, you're just kind of like, yeah, that's a good Beatles song. You wouldn't like think, oh yeah, The Word, like that's my favorite Beatles song. It's just a good Beatles song. Good Beatles songs sound like this? Like this is just your average Beatles song. It's so insanely good. What? I don't think we stop and smell the amount of roses we have here. Nasty. Nasty. No, I know what it is. We American. We American. I'm just trying to break up the music. Yes, Michelle. As far as Michelle goes, John says, I wrote the middle 8 of Michelle, one of Paul's songs. He and I were staying somewhere, and he walked in and hummed the first few bars with the words, and he says, where do I go from here? And I had been listening to Nina Simone. I think it was, I put a spell on you. And there was a line in there that went, I love you, I love you, I love you. And that's what made me think of the middle 8. I love you, I love you, I love you. My contribution to Paul's songs was always to add these little bluesy edge to them. Otherwise, Michelle was a straight ballad. He provided lightness and optimism, while I would always go for the sadness, the discords, the bluesy notes. There was a period when I thought I didn't write melodies, that Paul wrote those, and I just wrote straight shouting rock and roll. But of course, when I think of some of my own songs in my life or some of the early stuff, this boys, I was writing melodies with the best of them. John, being older and at art school, would take me to art school parties. I remember going to one and sitting in the corner with my black polo neck sweater on, trying to look interesting to this older crowd. I had the acoustic guitar with me, and I was playing a French sounding song and making guttural noises. I was half hoping that someone would think I was French, probably even a French intellectual. So that's where it all started, with my memory of having this faux French song that must have been influenced by Edith Piaf's Milord, a big hit in 1955. Milord was interesting because it was out of left field, whereas with other songs you knew what genre they were. And Milord, Piaf does the old trick of slowing down in the course of the song. I must have had a memory of that in the hopper. Another element was the fact that George Harrison and I liked learning new chords and finding ways to put them into songs. We knew a guy called Jim Gretty who worked in Hesse's guitar shop in Liverpool. We used to love going into the shop, and even though it meant we had to pay our dues with little books because of course we'd brought our guitars on an installment plan, Jim Gretty would often stand behind the counter in Hesse's playing a bit of guitar, as guys in shops often do. We really admired his skills. He was far more advanced than us. One chord we heard him play was particularly lush. He took the trouble to demonstrate it to us. It was what we knew as an F chord, a simple F shape, down at the first position, down the nut. But Jim used two more of his fingers to cover the first two strings up the fourth fret, which would be an A flat and an E flat, so there was an extra component to the F chord. The good thing was that if he showed us something to both of us, we were bound to remember it, because if George forgot, I'd remember it, and vice versa. We called Gretty's lush F chord F demented. In the Beatles period where we were looking for new songs, John once said to me, "Remember that daft French thing you used to do at parties?" I happened to meet up with Ivan Vaughan, who was probably my best friend in school. By then he'd been to University College in London to study classics. He and his wife Jan lived in, I'm gonna look that up,
Islington.
There you go. He and his wife Jan lived in Islington, and I used to visit them. Jan taught French, so I asked if she could think of a rhyme for Michelle, 2 syllables. She said ma belle. So how could I say these words go together in French? So Jan also gave me, I'm just gonna play the song part right here. Sans les mots, oui, vont très bien ensemble. You must sound the B in ensemble, so I always said ensemble with a silent B. In addition to the F demented, which would have had an official name like F augmented ninth or something, I put in a second naughty chord. Again, I don't know its name, maybe D diminished. I got it off the Coasters record, Along Came Jones. I used these two chords in this melody and grunted along like a cod Frenchman, and there was Michelle. Paul says, John and I were writing quite well by 1965. For a while, we didn't really have enough homemade material, but we did start to have around the time of Rubber Soul. When he says homemade material, he's not talking about them being up against the walls. He's talking about them not using covers. This is only the second Beatles album to have all original material, the first being A Hard Day's Night. Most of the time we wrote together, we'd go back and lock ourselves away and say, okay, what have we got? John might have half an idea, something like for In My Life, there are places I remember. I think he had that first as a lyric, like a poem, Places I Remember. And we'd work out the extra melody needed in the main theme, and by the end of 3 or 4 hours, we nearly almost had it cracked. I can't remember coming away from one of those sessions having not finished a song. It starts out very solemn. Very quickly it turns into an upbeat granny song. But it's not really a granny song. I love you, I love you, I love you. That bit is what really takes it out of the granny music department. Apparently came from John. That's the thing. They very much complement each other, and in my heart I feel like they are always going to be Lennon McCartney to some degree, because the level of which they influence each other on their songwriting even now. Paul says that he still like checks in with John mentally when he writes a song now. That harmony is like so smooth to me that I forget it is actually vocals. Doesn't it just sound like an instrument? The guitar there really breaks it up and keeps it from being too like saccharine for me. I really like it. I say that Michelle, for me, does not rank as high as other people would put it. And it's just like a personal taste thing. I say it over and over again. I'm not a very slow song person. This one doesn't make the cut for me. But ask me in 2 days, I'll probably change my mind. I have no idea what I'm gonna say the day that I film. If I could have actually filmed yesterday, if I actually had my voice, I would have said something different. I swear to God. But the vocals are incredible. What goes on? Now, this song was actually written by John in 1959, probably at Min Love Avenue, which is actually super interesting. And they were going to record it in 1963 for, was it with the Beatles? In March 1963, so that would have been with the Beatles, right? No, bitch, it would have been Please. No. Then they would have been recording it for, it wouldn't be recording it for With the Beatles, because With the Beatles was recorded in July. So but Please Please Me was released in February. Okay, whatever. Anyway, they possibly would have recorded it in 1963, but they didn't. John said that it was resurrected with a middle eight, probably with Paul's help. Barry Miles said that Ringo actually contributed for the song, but there's no actual middle eight in the song, according to Wikipedia. I don't know enough about music to tell you shit about that particular part. I'm sorry. And let's see. Here's a quote. Ringo said, "I wrote about 5 words on what goes on and haven't done a thing since." When was that? I don't know when that interview was. What goes on in your mind? I am always partial to a Ringo song. I wouldn't even say that Ringo's my favorite. I think that I baby him the most because we know the very least about him and he gets no attention. So I think, man, somebody's got to do it, you know? But I really like Ringo songs and I think that they're very fun. They're always very simple and usually kind of stupid early on, but they get better and better over the years. Ringo has said that Paul and John were really good about writing things that were meant for him. And this is one that's great. And John, in the harmonies vocally, makes this song. Like, absolutely makes it. Listen for it. You can hear him. I'm just trying to break up the music. Right there. Baby, that's a good John Lennon moment right there. It sounds great. The guitar in the middle. This is very fun, very 1959 to me, and I love it. I'm here for it. I love that early rock stuff. I'm a sucker for it. It's like super good Ringo. Ringo's voice sounds so good here. I would say, bold statement. I would say that we don't find another song that matches Ringo's voice as well until Don't Pass Me By. Very Beatles Bowie at the end. Girl, and this is one of the most exceptionally different songs on the album, coming from Help and before. I'll be honest, took me a while to come around on this one. Don't know why. I think it maybe made me sad a little bit. This song was about the dream girl for John, and he says, "This was about a dream girl. When Paul and I wrote the lyrics in the old days, we used to laugh about it like the Tin Pan Alley people would, and it was only later that we tried to match the lyrics to the tune. I liked this one. It was one of my best." Now, that little saying tit over and over again, the heavy breathing was also sort of implied to be sexual. This is what Paul says. "My main memory is that John wanted to hear the breathing and wanted it to be very intimate, so George Martin put a special compressor on the voice and then John dubbed it. I remember John saying to the engineer Norman Smith when we did Girl that when he draws his breath in, he wants to hear it." Paul says that was actually inspired by the Beach Boys that had a song out where they'd done La La La, and they loved the innocence and wanted to copy it but didn't want to have the same phrase. It was to get some light relief in the middle of this real big career we were forging. If we could put in something that was a little bit subversive, then we would. George Martin might say, "What was that, dit dit or tit tit you were singing?" And we're like, "Oh, dit dit, George." But it does sound a little bit like that, hee hee, and then we get in the car and break down laughing. All about the girl who came to stay. The combination of that guitar with the rattling percussion in John's voice is so haunting, I swear to God. I think that this song made me uncomfortable because that line, "She's the kind of girl you want so much, she'll make you sorry." Everybody's been in love like that, and you'll like make a fool out of yourself to love someone. You will embarrass yourself to love someone. You'll do anything for that person, and it's like, girl, you know? That too, lyrically, promises the world and I believe her, and after all this time I don't know why. Once again. Now that I'm fine with. When you say she's looking good, she acts as if it's understood. Yes. Confidence girl. Get it. I don't care about that shit at all. John says, it's about, was she taught when she was young that pain would lead to pleasure? Did she understand it? Sort of philosophy quotes I was thinking about when I wrote it. I was trying to say something or other about Christianity, which I was opposed to at the time because I was brought up in the church. I was pretty heavy on the church in both books, but it was never picked up, although it was obviously there. I was talking about Christianity and that you have to be tortured to attain heaven. That was the Catholic Christian concept, be tortured and then it'll be all right, which seems to be true, but not in their concept of it. I didn't believe in that you have to be tortured to attain anything. It just so happens that you are. So thinking of that with the Christianity bit, that you have to go through all of this torture to receive salvation. Will you care about that when the person around you, when they're dead? Will you care about whether they're saved or whatever when they're gone from your... I said I wasn't gonna cry, didn't I? Let's get really personal for a minute. I was raised in a situation where no malice, no malicious intent. We're very religious, and you believe very much in a very visceral reality of hell. Something bad happened, and I was no longer a part of that religion. Realizing later on that it was very cult-like. Everyone is entitled to their own religion. I don't care what you believe as long as it gives you a guide to live life without being an asshole. That's it. There are things that come with some religions. You look back and you're like, was it worth it for that? Will you still believe him when he's dead? Like, was it worth it? And I think sometimes people don't think about that. God, I cry every time. My God. Percussion right there, baby. Very good. I'm looking through you, and I don't know the backstory on this at all. I don't know if there really was much of one. So essentially, it's the same thing as before. Also about Jane. Essentially, that she wouldn't leave her career for him. Double tracking vocals are incredibly effective on this song. Very good. Harmonies are awesome there. I'm looking through you. You're not the same. Percussion, guys. Man, Paul was kind of fed up, wasn't he? Your lips are moving, I cannot hear. Your voice is Paul says, talk to the hand, bitch. By the way, you obviously should not tell your partner to leave their career. I do not know almost anything about Paul and Jane's relationship. I know how they broke up, but Paul was apparently a little fed up. Love the clapping. Once again, this is the incorrect lining saying that Ringo played the Hammond organ. I would like to ask you where. And I would have just read it off because I trust my notes. Like, and God, scared me. Only like sparingly in the harmonies here. I think really punctuates it. Good call. Sounds great. In My Life. George Martin says, In My Life is one of my favorite songs because it has so much John. A super track and such a simple song. There's a bit where John couldn't decide what to do in the middle, and while they were having their tea break, I put down a Baroque piano solo which John didn't hear until I came back. What I wanted was too intricate for me to do live, so I did it with a half-sped tempo and then sped it up, and he liked it. John says, In My Life was, I think, my first real major piece of work. Up until then, it had all been glib and throwaway. I had one mind that I wrote books and another mind that turned out things that about I love you and you love me because that's how Paul and I did it. I'd always try to make some sense of the words, but I never really cared. It was the first song that I wrote really consciously about my life. It was sparked by a remark a journalist and writer in England made after In His Own Right came out. He said to me, why don't you put some of the way you write in the book in the songs? Or why don't you put something about your childhood into the songs? I wrote the lyrics and then sang it. That was usually the case with things about In My Life and Across the Universe. Some of the ones that stand out a bit. I wrote it in in Kenwood upstairs where I had about 10 tape recorders all linked up. I'd mastered them over the period of a year or two. I could never make a rock and roll record, but I could make some far out stuff. It started out as a bus journey from my house on 251 Minlove Avenue to town. I had a complete set of lyrics naming every site. It became in my life a remembrance of friends and lovers of the past. Paul helped with the middle eight musically. And Paul says, funnily enough, this is one of the only songs John and I disagree on. I remember writing the melody on a Mellotron that was parked in his half landing. Lennon and McCartney's recollections differ regarding the music. Lennon said that McCartney's contribution melodically was the harmony in the middle eight. In 1977, when shown a list of songs Lennon claimed writing on for the magazine Hit Parader, In My Life was the only entry McCartney disputed. McCartney said he set Lennon's lyrics to music from beginning to end, taking inspiration from songs by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. In 1976, he commented, I liked In My Life. Those were words that John wrote and I wrote the tune to it. That was a great one. If you want my opinion, which means absolutely nothing, by the way, I don't think that Paul wrote the tune. I just don't. I think that this is a John song. It comes off very John to me. That is my personal belief. Love the way it starts. Very sweet. There are places I remember. Percussion, guys. Sincerely, I didn't expect that I was going to be going this hard into it today, but I think actually the timing of this song is one of the things that makes it so heart-wrenching. Harmonies are perfect, beautiful. Impeccable. This song is impeccable to me. I really love it. I do not put this on my playlist necessarily. I wouldn't like seek this song out to be like, hell yeah, this is my jam for this morning. Once again, I don't like slow songs, but I love this song. It's very sweet. Lots of discussion about who this song is specifically about. Lots of people have said that it was mostly about Paul and also Stuart Sutcliffe. John is known to have people in his life that he will keep as his like favorite person, like his very close people, and these very close people meant a whole lot. On Paul's 80th birthday, the John Lennon estate posted pictures of Paul and John and with lyrics to In My Life. So there's, you know, no reason to not believe that Paul was one inspiration to the song. And I think this line, I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before. I think that line specifically is very accurate to all of the Beatles' relationships with each other. Even when things were really bad, the way that they disliked each other is the way that the people that hurt you the most, the people that you wind up hating the most, are the people that you loved the most because they were close enough to hurt you that much. And it's obvious through the way that they lived their lives that the affection between all of them never went away. George Martin, ladies, gentlemen, and others. Very good. Played slow down, sped up for production. Wait, I love this song. This is one of those Beatles songs where it's like, I'm coming home, baby. It's gonna be on until I get home. But this is one of those things where it's like, things have been kind of rough, but I'm coming back. And I love this song so much. A long time, now I'm coming back home. That's great. The guitar right there, the riffs, very fun. Paul's double tracking is very good. Very fun. Very fun. Don't wait, turn me away. I don't have a particularly great way to punctuate the situation, but I really like what they're doing here with the harmonies. If I Needed Someone. Another George song, sounds awesome. Love this song so much. Now the song kind of has an Indian vibe to it because it's got a drone over it the whole time. I really like it. I think it's very indicative of George's mastery of vocal harmony early on. It reminds me of, it gives me Here Comes the Sun almost. Some people say that this is about Patty. It was written in 1965, so I doubt it. Now, George was not known to be the most faithful of men. In fact, none of the Beatles were until Paul married Linda. Yes, we know. This was probably more like a casual fling, kind of write your number on my wall and maybe I'll call you sometime, but don't think it's about Patty. If I needed someone. I can't really overstate the influence of the Byrds in this album, actually. Not only was there the sitar influence, but also in this song, this is straight from the Wikipedia as well. Harrison based the song's jangly guitar riff on one used by Robert McGuinn in the Byrds' adaptation of The Bells of Rhymney. That's giving me Here Comes the Sun. That guitar bit right there. Run for Your Life. Now let's talk about it. So Run for Your Life is one of my favorite Beatles. Like, not really, but it is. I really do love this song. I do. Now, those first two lines that everybody hates so much, now I'd rather see a dead little girl than to be with another man, is from Elvis's Baby Let's Play House. John says that he hates this song because those lines were nicked, and so he feels like he took the song off of Elvis. They wrote this. This was the dry session thing that Paul mentioned before. He's also mentioned that to Drive My Car, I believe, but he mentioned it about Run for Your Life, that was one of the worst sessions that they ever had. They had to press to get this. I understand how people feel about the lyrics to this song being violent or with domestic abuse. I'm not trying to be insensitive in any way, shape, or form. If it makes you feel any better, I'm a survivor of some of these things that we're talking about. But for me personally, I'm like, it's a song. That's just me. I don't get offended by You're 16 or Sweet Little 16 or any of that shit. Doesn't bother me. I guess maybe because I grew up listening to a lot of like classic pop, classic rock, where these were just kind of, you like understand that it's not like that. I always kind of viewed that as, I'm just going off right now. I always viewed the 16 thing for me personally as like it's a 16-year-old girl. She's cool. You know, when you're 16, you're mature. SATURDAY. Hey, like that's like very the vibe that I got. I know, different decade, okay, I'm aware. And I don't know, it just never personally bothered me. I just really like this song a whole lot. But I want to say, once again, these could be very like rightfully triggering words. I'd rather see you dead than to see you with another man. Holy crap, that's intense, right? So if you're someone who's sensitive to that, I'm not going to say that you're wrong for that. But that's just not how I view it. Peace and love. Let's listen to this song because it's awesome. I get that John hated it, but that doesn't change my enjoyment of it. Catch you with another man, that's the end. Little girl. Guys, it's a good song. It's a bop. I'm happy when I listen to it. Am I a bad person? Good guy and I was born with a jealous mind. Damn. It's a good line. It's a good line. He sings it great. I don't know. Then what am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to say? Do I have to say percussion or are we just like getting it by this point? Because it is the last song of the album. Woo! George, baby, give it to us. Baby, I'm determined. Now, see, once again, I get it. Like, baby, I'm determined that I'd rather see you dead. Like, this is repetitive. Like, this, it says it a lot. It still doesn't bother me, man. Am I a bad person? Because I haven't really stopped and thought about how much he says it until just now. But it still doesn't bother me. Those harmonies are so good, though. That's like remarkably good. I know it's treated like a throwaway song because people don't like it, so you don't listen to it, and that it was also inspired by Elvis, so people don't give it as much credence. This is a good song. It is. It really is. I dig a na-na-na. I truly do. It's a good song, okay? It's a good song. I don't feel like it was nicked off of anybody. I have seen lots of people start their own songs with lyrics from other people. It happens all the time. In fact, we have another Beatles song that is incredibly well known that starts with someone else's lyrics. That being said, he didn't say that he'd rather see someone dead like 40 times in that song, so who knows? Either way, valid. I think maybe I'm on the asshole side of things. If this was a Reddit thread, I would be voted down. I get it. I see why, especially after like listening to it thinking, well, if that was like a sensitive spot, yeah, valid. No hate, no shame, okay? But with all that being said, Rubber Soul was an album that changed things. It changed the way that they started writing their songs, the way that they started producing the songs, and the way that John Lennon specifically started digging into his own lyrics to write things like he wrote his books. And therefore, Paul would start digging into his lyrics more too. I don't think I find a skip in this album, not a single one. Very impressive. Always happy to hear it. Now, why don't y'all go listen to Rubber Soul and come back and talk to me about it? Within the first day or two, I respond to lots of comments, so I might hit you back. Thanks guys so much for hanging out with me. I would absolutely love it if you would like and subscribe and all of that jazz. And y'all come back now, you hear? Bye.
My sweet Lord. My Lord. My Lord. But it takes so long, my Lord. My sweet Lord.